Hi everyone, my name is Sharon Pierce. I am an assessment manager at Michigan Language Assessment. And in today's webinar, I will be unpacking for you the brand new ECPE writing section that is launching in May 2021. Before we jump in, we do have a poll that's going live. I'm going to ask you a little bit about who we have tuning in today. So you should see that pop up on your screen. You can check all of the responses that apply to you, and we'll close that poll in a few here just to kind of see who we have joining us. So welcome. So before we get started, just a couple of things as far as Zoom logistics go. So you've probably noticed everybody is muted and has their cameras off, with the exception of myself and my two colleagues that are joining me today. But you can interact via the chat. I know a lot of you have done that already, said hello or shared something with us. So that is available to you. You also have available to you the Q&A function. So for the Q&A, you will only see your own submissions there. But that's where you can send in questions that you have about the new ECPE writing section as I'm going through the presentation. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session and we'll try to answer as many of those questions as we're able to. We are recording today's session as well, so we'll let you know when the recording becomes available. Some of you may have tuned in last week when my colleague Rochelle Stucker hosted a webinar all about all of the changes to the new ECPE and ECCE. That recording is now up on our YouTube channel, so if you missed it, you can still go and check that out. In today's session, we are going to look at the new task types that we have in ECPE writing, so the article, proposal, and essay tasks. We'll also look at the new feature of the source information that's provided to the test takers. And then we'll dig into the new ECPE writing rating scale, the criteria that are used to evaluate responses. And finally, we'll take a look at some sample responses from test takers to see how the rating scale is applied to them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end our poll here. Thank you so much for all of you that responded. And I'm going to share the results with you. You should be able to see that on your screen. So it looks like we have lots of teachers joining us today. Welcome. We have some language school owners, some professors, test center administrators. We even have some students, materials developers. So all kinds joining us today. And thank you so much for being here with us today. Okay. So let's talk about the new ECPE writing section. So the writing section assesses a test taker's written production in English at the C2 level. Before we look at the tasks and the scale and all of those details, I wanted to spend a moment just talking about what the CEFR says about writing at C2. So what I'd like you to do now is share some ideas using the chat function on what features of writing, what skills or what abilities you would expect a C2 level writer to demonstrate. In other words, what can a C2 level writer do? So take a moment, share some ideas in the chat. When you think about C2, what do you think a C2 level writer can do? I see some ideas coming in already. Complex language, use advanced grammar, comfortable using a variety of structures accurately, okay. Expressing ideas clearly. Organize their essay, complex structures, idiomatic expressions, use vocab and grammar competently, coherence, okay. communicate effectively using different structures, advanced vocabulary, clear structure, complexity. Lots of great ideas coming in the chat. Thank you for participating. Subtle shades of meaning, yes. Okay, so I'm going to share some kind of key descriptors at C2 with you. So when we think about what a C2 level writer can do, some of the key concepts that I'd like to point out, and all of you pointed out a lot of these things as well, but they can produce clear, smoothly flowing, complex reports, articles, or essays which present a case. They can write engaging descriptions of experience in a style that's appropriate to the genre. They can provide an appropriate and effective logical structure, which helps the reader find significant points. They can set out multiple perspectives on complex academic or professional topics and clearly distinguish their own ideas and opinions from those in the sources, and have a good command of a very broad lexical repertoire, including idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms, and showing awareness of connotative levels of meaning. So in developing the new ECPE writing tasks and the rating scale, we test developers here at Michigan Language Assessment use descriptors from the CEFR like these as building blocks to ensure that this new test would be a robust measure of written production at this level. So we're going to kind of come back to some of these statements as we continue talking, but keep these concepts in mind, this idea of C2 in mind. And we're going to take a look at the new tasks now and then the evaluation criteria in the rating scale. Okay, so the new ECPE writing section is going to be assessing a test taker's ability to compose a clear and complex C2 level piece of writing that evaluates multiple viewpoints on a topic and includes the test taker's own opinion about the issue. The test taker is presented with two tasks. They choose one of the two tasks provided, and those tasks can be in the form of an essay, an article, or a proposal, and the test takers will have 45 minutes to compose their response. There are also 3 sources that are provided with visual support, such as a chart, a graph, a speech bubble, and the test taker will need to incorporate at least one of these sources into their response. So let's take a closer look at each of the possible task formats that I've just described. Let's take a look at the essay task first. So here on screen, I have an example of an essay task. In this task, the test taker is presented with a claim about a conceptual or abstract idea, and then they're asked to consider the positive and negative impacts or effects of this idea, as well as their own opinion. So let's take a look at this prompt. Social media has allowed people to connect from around the world. What positive and negative impact might this have? Write an essay addressing this topic and explain what you think about it. Include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. So what I want to show you is that every essay task follows the same sort of basic structure or format. So let's break it down. In the essay task, we're always going to start with a claim. So this really sets the scene. It gives context. It lets the test taker know what topic will need to be considered. So in this case, it's this idea of social media, allowing people to connect from all over the world. The next element here is the question. So this is always going to address multiple sides of an issue. We want test takers to consider multiple viewpoints in their responses. So in this particular task, it's what positive and negative impact might this have? You might see the question phrased slightly differently, but it's always going to get at this idea of multiple viewpoints. The next part is the task instruction. So this tells test takers to write an essay and to address that claim and that question that were presented above, but also to include their own opinion about it. So addressing multiple perspectives as well as their own. And the last element is always going to be the source instruction. We'll go over the sources in more detail in just a bit, but this is standard text that's included in every task. So it's instructing them to include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. So in the prompt, as we'll see in a little bit, we have the 3 sources above the task, and we're instructing the test taker to incorporate at least one of those into their response. Let's look at one more example of an essay task. So a different one here. Some people believe that an employee's wellness is connected to their working conditions. What positive and negative effects do you think that a company's working conditions might have on employees? Write an essay addressing this topic and discuss what you think about it. Include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. So again, we're starting with that claim. It's followed by a question that gets at the idea of multiple perspectives. The task instruction that's telling the test taker to consider that claim and that question and also their own opinion. And finally, that source instruction, incorporating that external information into the response. So that's the essay task, but we do have 2 other formats that the task can be presented in. So let's take a look at those. We will look at the article task next. So here is an example of an article task. In the article task, the test taker is presented with a situation that impacts a large group of people, and then they're asked to discuss multiple viewpoints on it as well as their own opinion. So this prompt, teachers in your school plan to use a popular social media platform for class activities. Some teachers and students are excited about this idea, but others are not. Write an article for the school newspaper on the effects of forcing students and teachers to use social media for classwork and your opinion about it. Include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. So just like the essay task, the article task follows a standard kind of structure. So let's look at that. First, we have the situation. So in the article task, the test taker is provided with a description of a concrete situation that impacts a large group of people. So in this case, it's teachers in the school that are planning to use social media for their classes. Next, we have viewpoints. So a sentence here that summarizes some of the viewpoints on the issue from those who are impacted. So some of the teachers and the students are excited about this idea of social media in class, others are not. Next is the task instruction. So this piece indicates to the test taker the audience that they're writing to. So in this case, they're writing for a school newspaper. It also indicates that they should discuss different or opposing sides of the issue in their response, and it instructs them to give their own opinion as well. And finally, again, we have that source instruction, that standard text. So that's the article task. And the last one is the proposal. So in the proposal, the test taker is asked to evaluate multiple viewpoints on an issue. This should start to sound familiar. But what's different here is that they're also asked to persuade the reader to take a particular course of action. But you'll notice the structure is really similar to that of the article task. So here's a proposal task. A local company wants to allow its employees to make decisions about their working hours and create their own schedules for coming into the office. Some people at the company think that this is not a good idea. Write a proposal to the president of the company, evaluating the different options, and explain what you think should be done. Include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. Okay, so let's break down the proposal. Again, we're starting with a situation. So the test taker is provided with a description of a concrete situation that impacts a large group of people. Next, viewpoints, a sentence that summarizes some of the viewpoints on the issue from those that are impacted. The task instructions, so again, indicating who the audience is. In this case, it's the president of the company that the proposal is going to be directed to. It also indicates that they should discuss the different and opposing sides of the issue in the response, and then again instructs them to give their own opinion on what should be done or what action should be taken. And then finally, that standard source instruction. So as we've seen, these new tasks can present themselves in 3 different formats. The test taker will always have the essay as one of the 2 options. So as I mentioned, the test taker will always be presented with 2 different tasks and they choose which one to respond to. One of those will always be the essay. The other option will be either the article or the proposal, but never both. All 3 task types, though, they have the same overall objective, as you probably have picked up on. Each task seeks to elicit a response from the test taker that includes a discussion of multiple viewpoints on the topic, as well as the test taker's own opinion. So those are sort of the key similarities. Each task also asks the test taker to use at least one of the provided sources. As far as the differences between the task types, they are different genres with different audiences. So the essay is more of the traditional response type with an academic focus, whereas the article and proposal tasks, they give the test taker a specific audience or context to write within. So for the article, usually that audience is going to be a group who's impacted by the situation that's provided. For the proposal, the test taker is to write directly to someone with decision-making power over the situation. And that information will always be in that task instruction component of the task. The only other difference between the task types is that the essay topic will typically be something more abstract, while the article or proposal topics will be more concrete. So for example, we have a prompt in which the article task is about robots delivering packages to homes and businesses. And the paired essay task is about the impacts of online shopping making products more accessible. So the 2 tasks that are presented together will always be in the same general topic area, and then the sources that are provided will apply to both task options. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at sources next. Okay. So I have an example on screen for you now. For each prompt, so again, which includes an essay task and then either an article or a proposal task, the test taker will be provided with 3 sources that are relevant to the overall topic. So the 2 tasks are on different specific topics, but overall they're in the same topic area. The sources can be presented in the form of charts, graphs, figures, speech bubbles. They include some concise text as well as a reference to where the information came from. So for example, in these we have a 2019 study, a recent news report, or a quote will be attributed to a specific person. So the test taker will need to incorporate at least one of these sources into their response. Now they can choose to include more than one, but that's not required. That's at their discretion. What we want to see here is how the test taker uses the information to support the ideas in their response. And also that they can acknowledge that this information has come from some external source and not just from their own brain. So remember that CEFR descriptor that I showed you that was about multiple perspectives and distinguishing one's own ideas and own opinions from those in sources. That's really the main focus here with these sources. The test takers might choose to quote the sources directly. They might choose to paraphrase them. It's really up to them how they want to incorporate it, depending on how they're using it. They don't need to follow any particular conventions in terms of citation or anything like that. So we're not looking for, APA formatting or anything of that sort. We want to see how they use them to support their ideas and some sort of acknowledgement that the information came from somewhere else. So when we look at some sample responses in a little bit, you'll be able to see what that might look like. But before we get to that, I want to talk a bit about the ECPE Writing Rating Scale, which is also brand new. Check how we're doing on time here. Okay. So the ECPE Writing section has the following new scoring criteria. We have task completion, development, language, and authorial voice. So I want to go through each one of these in more detail. Let's start with task completion. This criteria looks at whether the task taker's response addresses the specific topic provided in the task that they chose. It looks at if they evaluated multiple viewpoints on the issue as well as included their own opinion, and how they have integrated at least one of those provided sources into their response to support their ideas. So if we think back to those CEFR descriptors, some of the key points here is this idea of multiple perspectives, that at C2 writers should be able to incorporate that. And also, as I just mentioned, this idea of distinguishing one's own ideas from external ones. The next criteria is development. So development considers the extent of support or the depth of support provided for the points made in the response, as well as how clearly and logically the writing is organized. So the connection to the CEFR here is this idea of complexity, that getting at that idea of depth, as well as the organization, appropriate and effective logical structure. Next criteria is language. So language covers control of grammatical features, as well as the range and usage of vocabulary in the writing. So here we have this idea of smoothly flowing, so control of grammar, and a very broad lexical repertoire referencing that vocabulary range. The final criteria is authorial voice. This criteria covers the originality of the response and how the test taker uses rhetorical devices such as appeals to shared knowledge, appeals to emotion, could be rhetorical questions, personal examples, specific details, something to engage the reader. So in the CEFR, we see that word engaging appear at C2. So that's what we're looking for with authorial voice. So at this point, I'd like us to take a look at some sample responses so that you can see how this all comes together, how the criteria we just went over are applied to responses. So a few things before we jump into that. The new ECPE Writing Rating Scale, as well as the sample responses we're going to look at today and then some, are all available on our website. So you can download the entire revised ECPE sample test. It's a zip file with quite a few PDFs. There's a lot of resources there. We're going to take a look at just some of the writing samples, but just know there is a lot more on our website. So michiganassessment.org. After the webinar, you can go check it out and download those resources. Okay, so what we're going to do with the sample responses, I'm going to read through for you several sample responses from test takers, and I'll put the text on the screen as well. And as I read each one, I want you to think about how the response meets the evaluation or the rating criteria. So keep these 4 things in mind. You might want to write them down. You might want to take a screenshot, but we're thinking about task completion, development, language, and authorial voice. So I'll read through some responses, and then after each one, I'll talk about these 4 criteria and how the test taker performed. And so if you'd like to follow along in this way, you can take some notes while I'm reading, and then you can compare your notes with mine to help you better understand this new test section. So just make sure that you remember the 4 criteria. That's what we're going to focus on as we look at these responses. Okay, the first sample we're going to look at was written in response to the article task that you see on screen now. It's one of the task examples that we broke down into its different components earlier about social media being used in class. You can see here the 3 sources that the test takers were presented with. So we have some charts and graphs, a direct quote, and then again, in this particular task, we're asking the test taker to write an article for the school newspaper about the effects of forcing teachers and students to use social media for class and what the test taker's opinion about it is. Okay, so let's take a look at the response. Remember the criteria as you follow along. Make a few notes if you need to, and we'll talk about how this response meets them at the end. Okay, social media in the classroom. Can this provide that extra oomph students need? For better or worse, the internet has really changed the way we communicate with others. Tom Withers, professor. For better or worse. In this age, as we look towards the social movement online, we find that social media isn't the perfect place as it is portrayed in advertisements. There is always place for comments that detract from the innocence and beauty of everyday things. We constantly see an avalanche of gossip and bad vibes around posts and videos. How can we bring this into the classroom? Going around the school, I managed to get some very different opinions on the subject, ranging from, oh, that would be awesome, to, oh my God, no. When asked about their responses, I met with both joy and fear. But why were these emotions so extreme? I went to social media to find out the reason for these feelings, and what I found wasn't pretty. The first account I researched belonged to the excited side. There I could see thousands of pictures and posts that could make any social media personality jealous. Perfect pictures and perfect lives that people enjoyed. I could see why more videos and pics for their feed would be attractive and would point to a positive look towards social media in a class. Then I switched accounts to the opposite side of the discussion. I watched as more 20 pictures appeared in the feed, ranging from 0 to 8 likes, including parents and or extended family. This page was desolate. There was one post that appeared after a few minutes, and not long from that, a comment appeared. To my dismay, one of the known popular kids from the school shut down the photo with a rather nasty comment. After a few seconds, I refreshed the feed and found that the post was no more. It had been deleted. After all of the interviews and research, both online and offline, I came to several findings. My first finding was that the amount of users of social media has gone up 1/3. This is important because we can see that we are more exposed to the world than ever before. The most important finding was that over 50% of users think that they can truly express their opinions freely, meaning that both good and bad opinions are able to reach millions. This got me thinking, how can a school protect their students from their own and even outside opinions? How can we share a classroom with 3 billion users and expect good results? I just can't fathom that. Authorities can merely control acts of bullying inside their grounds, and now we are expected to share what we do with the world? As many students and teachers that are excited and accepting social media in their classrooms, there is a quiet audience who fears what might happen if we let the world inside the class. Schools should first manage their current problems before jumping into the social media world as it is right now. To end this, I will leave my own comment to this post, but what if? Take it as you may. Okay, so as I said, now you can compare any notes that you made to mine. I'll go through each of the 4 criteria and see how this performance measures up. So as far as task completion, the writer really fulfills all of the task requirements. So they've written an article, they've discussed the impact of social media use in the classroom, and they've also incorporated provided their own opinion. As far as the sources, they did include that direct quote at the beginning of their response. There is also information from the other two sources included in paragraph 5. However, the information isn't really explicitly attributed to the provided sources, and it could be misinterpreted as some of the writer's own findings. So they kind of made it sound like this was their own research. So what we would have liked to have seen here was some acknowledgement that this information came from an external source. As far as development goes, this response is a well thought out article. The writer's ideas are clearly described, they're organized in a logical way, and each paragraph moves forward the writer's argument all the way to the conclusion. In terms of language, the writer uses quite precise and sophisticated vocabulary that is appropriate for this article. So for example, use of words and phrases like detract, the avalanche of gossip, or dismay. The language that's used is somewhat informal, but it's fitting for this kind of writing prompt. The writer demonstrates control of simple and of most complex sentences. There are some errors in complex sentences that might have been distracting for you as the reader. So in paragraph 1, there is always place for comments. And in paragraph 7, school should first manage. But overall, these don't take away or detract from the meaning. They're quite minor. Finally, for authorial voice, this writer's response is highly engaging and original. The writer uses some rhetorical questions really successfully in both paragraph 1 and again in paragraph 6. So using this type of strategy to reach out to the person who is reading and get them to think about the ideas that are being presented. So overall, for this first example, this test taker, we would say is well prepared to take the ECPE writing section. Okay, so I want to show you a few more examples so you can just get a sense of the variety of responses. Let's take a look at that same prompt, but instead of the article, I want to look at the essay task. So you see we have the same sources. The essay task is also one we looked at earlier. It's about social media, allowing people to connect from around the world, and what are the positive and negative impacts. Okay, so again, I will read through the response from the test taker. As I do so, make some notes about those 4 criteria, and then we'll talk through each one in detail. Okay, example number 2. Social media is now used in every corner of the world, and that has a big impact in all of our lives. First of all, nowadays the internet and especially social media has made our lives much more easier, although it has got many advantages and disadvantages. By using social media, people can connect with whoever they want or need all around the world. This is surely one of the most important things social media can offer. If someone wants to communicate with his friends, even if they are abroad, they just have to text or FaceTime. Also, if someone goes for studies in a university abroad, communication will not be a problem now. Social media users have risen dramatically from 2016 until now. Moreover, the use of social media has given us the opportunity to connect and talk with people from all around the world. And this is definitely a great opportunity for teenagers and especially students. By communicating with others that live far away from us, people can learn a lot. Teenagers can create friendship bonds and can learn about the culture and the lifestyle in remoted areas in our world, but also they can find out what is going on worldwide. Therefore, social media might have a negative impact in our lives too. By communicating with others globally can make people, and especially in younger ages, get distracted from their homework or their other activities, which can lead to other more serious diseases physically and mentally. Also, internet has unfortunately got many dangers too. Everyone should know with whom they are talking and which is the other side's purpose. As a professor has said, for better or worse, the internet has really changed the way we communicate with others. To conclude, social media has one main role in our lives and undoubtedly in communication, but none of us has to get off limits. Okay, let's go through those 4 criteria, starting with task completion. So this writer addresses the task quite fully. They've crafted an essay that discusses the impact of social media and given their own opinion. They have integrated one of the provided sources, which was the quotation. And then they also have included some information from a second source here about social media users, the number increasing. But again, the source itself isn't referenced. So what we'd like to see is some acknowledgement, for example, like in a 2019 study, blah, 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 some kind of connecting phrase to show that the information being presented is coming from some external source. They did that successfully with the quote, but not so much with the second one. In terms of development, the writer's ideas are generally well supported. There is a section when they're talking about the dangers of social media. This could have really been more developed. There was a lot of potential here that just wasn't fully realized. So the test taker is mentioning that distractions can lead to diseases, but they don't really explore the connection between those ideas very fully. So that would have been an opportunity to further develop the ideas and get at that depth and complexity that we want to see at this level. For language, the writer demonstrates control of simple and some complex syntactic structures. There are some morphological breakdowns throughout in some longer sentences. So in remoted areas, for example, there's some subject-verb agreement issues when they're using more complex tenses, like in paragraph 3, social media might has. But again, these are not major errors. They're not too distracting where you can't get at the meaning. And they do attempt quite a few complex structures. In terms of vocabulary, the vocabulary used in this response is generally successful. It matches the context. For authorial voice, this response's content is somewhat original, especially some of the ideas about connecting with others while studying abroad, learning about other cultures. But apart from those ideas, the response is fairly straightforward and predictable. We don't see appeals to emotion or personal specific examples that help kind of bring some life to the response. But generally, it's somewhat original. So overall, for example, we would say this test taker is well prepared to take the ECPE writing section as well. Okay, let me see how we're doing on time. I think we have time to look at one more example. I do want to leave us a little bit of time at the end for questions, but let's look at example 3. This is in response to a proposal task. So I wanted to show you sort of one of each so you could get a sense of the different variety of responses. As I said, on our website, you can see many more examples in addition to the ones I'm showing you now. So this is a different prompt than the 2 that we just looked at previously. This one is more about a workplace focus. So again, we have some charts and graphs, we have a direct quote, and this proposal task, a local company wants to allow its employees to make decisions about their working hours and create their own schedules for coming into the office. Some people at the company think that this is not a good idea. Write a proposal to the president of the company evaluating the different options and explain what you think should be done. Include at least one piece of information given above to support your response. So just like the others, Let's read through this response and then talk through the 4 criteria. Here's the response. Madam President, while most people would agree that their working schedules are very tiring, the number of companies that continue making these decisions for their employees is on the increase. Clearly, it is not reasonable to work for hours and hours and not have any time to rest when you want to. Therefore, the aim of my proposal is to present the benefits of allowing employees to make their own schedules. Some people at the company think that this is not a good idea because employees might set a bad schedule. Maybe it's too difficult for them and they want to change it later. That might be messy for you and other bosses. But to help with this, you can ask people to try a schedule out first so they can see how it affects their children and outside lives. You can show them that work is not their opponent and they can feel less anxious, unhappy, and even depressed because they are listened to. Another benefit of letting employees create their working schedules is they will get to decide when and how much time off that is good for them. There is a strong feeling among all concerned that having more time off increases employee productivity, as are the results of a recent study in 2019. More particularly, workers that are able to offer the company the most essential ideas, and generally people who seem to be very clever at work, are those who have some leisure time in order to stay with their families, their friends, and do something to relax. Choosing their schedules will help them be less anxious and also be more productive at work. Therefore, it would be advantageous to your company in the long run because employees will contribute more to their work. They will also arrive on time because they chose when to begin working, and they will have more fun. What I mean is that when people have time to relax, they comprehend that their work is not only something that gives them money, but also a benefit for their life. Doing a job that you like makes you feel happy and also gives you the chance to gain new experiences and knowledge, meet people with different beliefs, cooperate with them, and also past your everyday time. If all the above suggestions are implemented, allowing your people to create their own schedules will be very productive for your workplace. People will have to cooperate to figure out new schedules, and both you and the workers will achieve success. I am sure everything I said will help you and your employees make the most beneficial decision. All right, let's take a look at the criteria for this one. So this writer addresses the topic and they fulfill all of the task requirements. So their proposal to the company president really clearly indicates the suggestions that they have. They're looking at the different sides of things. They're giving their own opinion about what should be done. In paragraph 3, the writer fully integrates one of the provided sources and uses it to support their ideas about employee cleverness and relaxation. So this is a great example of really integrating a source into a response. In terms of development, the ideas in this response are well supported and developed. In paragraph 2, the writer addresses the feelings of some people at the company and provides a suggestion to help ease their concerns. In paragraphs 3 and 4, let me go back here. In paragraphs 3 and 4, the writer describes the effects of employees creating their own schedule by addressing the impact on their personal and professional lives. And then finally, in the conclusion, they summarize the proposal's main point, the benefits, so the organization is really clear, and they use a lot of connectors to help with the flow of their ideas. In terms of language, this writer demonstrates control of complex syntactic structures in paragraph 3. And also in paragraph 4, lots of examples of that. The vocabulary used in the response really adequately matches the context of the writing. So it's a proposal to the president. They exhibit some sophistication with the vocabulary. So words like benefit, advantageous, clever, leisure time, opponent, implemented, Lots of good examples there. For authorial voice, this writer's response is convincing, and it has some originality to it as well. The writer expands beyond the prompt's premise and considers the personal aspects of the employee's lives. So talking about leisure time, raising children. I would say the most engaging parts of this response are when the writer is directly addressing the president of the company. So like in paragraph 4, it would be advantageous to your company. So that direct address. Also in paragraph 5, allowing your people to create their own schedules. So again, this particular response, this writer is also quite well prepared to take the ECPE writing section. I chose to show you some of the successful responses, but again, if you download those sample test materials from our website, you'll be able to review quite a few more. So I hope that these have given you a good idea of what you can expect with this new test. At this point, I do want to move on just to make sure that we have time for some questions. So I see that you've been putting some questions into the Q&A here on Zoom, so thank you for that. I'm going to ask my colleagues who are on the call from Michigan to help kind of moderate the Q&A. We'll get to as many questions as we can. If there are common or repeated questions, we'll try to make sure that we get to those. So Rochelle, if you are able to unmute yourself, what questions do we have?
Sure. Well, we have several questions. I see some both in the chat and in the Q&A tool. I'll try to get to some from both of them. One question that I've seen pop up several times was a question about required length of responses. Many attendees are asking, how many words are required? Is there a minimum? Is there a limit? Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we actually don't have a hard rule on this. We're not looking for a particular length. I would say to look back at the rating criteria, what we really want to see is development. So we want to see ideas that are fully fleshed out and supported. And that's more important than the number of words or pages. So if you're a teacher preparing students, I would advise you to really focus on that idea of development and not worry as much about counting words or number of pages. That being said, I think it's safe to say that most ECPE test takers write between 1 and 2 pages in their response. But again, I would just really encourage you to focus on that development aspect.
Okay, thanks. Some other people
Sure.
also commented on the length of the sample responses that were shown. I'm guessing that perhaps these are longer than the responses that we have seen on the current ECPE, maybe because of the length of time that we now allow test takers for their response. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so the length of the test has been extended to 45 minutes. Because this is a more complex level of writing than, for example, the ECCE, it's warranted to have that additional time. So yeah, it's possible that test takers may be able to produce somewhat longer responses because they have that additional time. But I'll just reiterate that the length is not really the key thing that we'll be looking at with the responses. It's going to be those criteria that we went over.
Great. I also see a lot of questions about the use of headings, titles, subheaders, and things like that. Could you talk about whether or not those are required or allowed in any of the response types?
Yeah, for sure. So we have seen that test takers sometimes are including things like this in their responses, especially for things like the article task, creating a title for it, like the example that we looked at together. So that's something at the test taker's discretion. We're not being prescriptive in any way about the format of things. So when we talked about the different rating criteria, in terms of the task completion aspect, we're more focused on those core components of the multiple perspectives, the test taker's opinion, incorporating one of those sources, acknowledging that it came from somewhere else, being on topic, addressing the audience. So if it's, the school newspaper, the president of the company, making sure that that comes across. So if the test taker feels that including things like headings or titles is useful or helpful in organizing their response, they're welcome to do that, but we don't have any explicit requirement around that being part of the response.
Another attendee asked if it's possible for the test taker to respond citing all three of the sources that they are given.
Yes, so we only require that one of the three sources be incorporated into the response, but we have seen that sometimes test takers find ways to use all three of them. If you're a teacher preparing students, I would maybe just focus on starting with one because that is what the requirement is. If they want to use more than that, that's great. As long as it's helping them to support their ideas, that's the key thing. So I would say it would be better to use one source and have it really make a strong point than to use all three, but just kind of have them stuck in there without being explained or fully integrated. So the key thing with the sources is how they're being used to support the ideas, whether it's one meeting those requirements fully or whether they want to include more, that's really at their discretion.
Great. One of the attendees has asked if all four of the criteria in the rating scale are weighted equally. So
I don't want to get too much into rating details since, this is in a rater training scoring type of session. If you look at the rating scale, you will see that the different values in terms of numbers for scores that are assigned are different across the different criteria. And the reason for that is that there's different ranges of ability that we're looking at, especially with a category like language. We have a wide range of different abilities that we want the scale to be able to capture. Whereas with something like authorial voice, it's something that's sort of there or not. So that explains the differences in the different criteria on the scale.
Okay, thanks. Many people are asking about the type of response. Are we only expecting positive versus negative sort of responses? Or some people have asked, would there also be instances in which test takers are asked to discuss a problem and a solution, or a cause and an effect, or some other structure like that?
Yeah, so regardless of the genre or the task type, we're always going to ask the test taker to consider multiple perspectives or viewpoints. So oftentimes that could take the shape of positive and negative, but not necessarily. It's just going to be looking at a particular issue and what are the different perspectives that may exist on it. So acknowledging that there are more than one points of view on a particular topic. We would see in the proposal task this idea of problem solution. That's sort of the way that it's set up, where we have the situation that's being proposed. We have that viewpoint sentence explaining, how those impacted our feeling about it generally. And then the test taker is asked to explain, what are the possible solutions out there and which one do you think is the one that should be taken forward? So in that sense, it is a bit different than just looking at positives and negatives. But I would just highlight again that the sort of overarching connecting point is that regardless of the task type, it's going to be asking the test taker to look at multiple points of view.
Okay. Someone else has asked if we are moving away from the expectation of a 4 or 5 paragraph length response. She said that she had, typically taught her students that the 5 paragraph essay structure is what was the ideal for their response. Would you say that this is still the case?
So I think that the 5-paragraph format is a really handy tool and reference for test takers and students to learn, because it's a really clear, structured way to put ideas together in a response. Now, is it the only way that test takers can effectively respond to these tasks? Definitely not. As you saw in some of the sample responses we looked at, not every response is following that format, especially if we have, something like the article or proposal tasks. There's a bit more freedom in terms of, how to structure things. I would say for test takers that are still building their skills, that sort of standard 5-paragraph essay format is going to be a really helpful tool to ensure that they have order and logic to the way they're presenting their ideas. But again, I think there are many other ways that one could effectively organize a response. So I wouldn't say that, that's the only way to write a successful response.
Okay, and following on from that, someone has asked if single sentence paragraphs are discouraged. She said that she noticed that there were some in the responses that you discussed. She had always thought that students should be taught not to write single sentence paragraphs, but she noticed some. Is this an issue?
So again, I think it goes back to the genre or the purpose for writing. So in the essay task, it's a bit more academic, a bit more formal, but something like the article task is a different animal. It's a bit more informal. The format doesn't necessarily need to look like that, structured paragraph format. So I would say, yeah, it really depends on the task itself, and having a one sentence paragraph, if you will, could be effective, as we saw in some of the examples. So I don't think that necessarily we have to be bound to those sort of rules.
Okay, I think the response you just gave leads really well into this next question, and probably kind of answers it. But several people commented on the informal nature of some of the responses that you showed.
Yeah.
And they said that they were surprised because they found them to be more informal than the style of writing that they have been teaching their students. And they want to know if they should perhaps incorporate more informal writing tasks and exercises in their teaching. What would you recommend?
I mean, I would say yes. At this level, at C2, if you look at the CEFR, it's all about variety and complexity and ease, regardless of genre. And so being able to be flexible as a writer in those different formats is an important skill. So my advice would be, yes, have your students try writing in different styles and formats. At this level, they have the building blocks and the foundation of skills, of language, of structures to do that. And so, yeah, have some fun with it and get them to try out these different styles, because that's part of what we want to get at with these tasks, is to allow for that flexibility in writing.
Okay, and there are some more questions revisiting the two sides to an issue. Somebody is asking, is it possible for there to be a topic which just asks for the test taker's opinion and to justify it without talking about the other side? Should the test takers always acknowledge the other side of the issue, or can they only just advocate for their opinion in their response?
Yeah, so one of the key things about this new ECPE writing task is that regardless of whether it's an essay, an article, or a proposal, something that we want to see in every response is discussion of multiple points of view, so opposing sides of the issue. So if the test taker were to only focus on their own opinion, they wouldn't be fulfilling the criteria for task completion, because the tasks are all asking the test taker to consider the impact on multiple sides or multiple perspectives. So that's something really key that we want to make sure is clear and that is included, is this discussion of more than one point of view, but also discussion of the test taker's own point of view. So I would say both are equally important, and if they were to only discuss their own opinion, they would not be successfully completing the task.
Great, thank you. Several people have also asked about materials for preparation, and I just want to
Okay.
say that someone from our educational materials department has sent me a message letting me know that we can tell everyone that we are working on a revised version of the ECPE Writing Resource Pack that will
Yes.
take these new samples and new version into account. So later this fall, you can expect to find that available. And I also want to mention that those of us in the assessment division have given similar webinars for publishers. We know that several publishing companies are currently working on additional materials to have ready for students for their preparations for next year. So there are materials coming for all of you who are asking for that
Yes.
in the chat Q&A. There will be more available by the time your students are really kicking into high gear to prepare for this test. It is
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Sure. Yeah, there are a lot of people asking about materials, and of course, we know that they were much needed and much appreciated.
Yes.
We are already over time, so I think we will stop here. If there is anyone whose question I did not get to in the chat or Q&A, please feel free to send it to us at info@michiganassessment.org.
Yes. Here's our website. Here's the email address that Rochelle just mentioned. So as I said, if you haven't already, you can go to our website, check out all of the new sample test materials for both ECPE and ECCE. Take a look at those writing sample responses, the commentaries. And again, you can always contact us at this email address with any questions we didn't get to. I just want to say it's been a real pleasure working through the details of the new ECPE writing section with all of you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. We will let you know when the recording of this session is available. Thank you so much.